No. We weren't called to be mediocre. We weren't called to settle. We were called to be uncommon. We were called to be different. And our purpose, if we define it properly, is much bigger than that. So let's keep growing.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Today's guest is a living example of transformation. John Gallagher is the founder and CEO of Growing Champions Coaching and Consulting, where he equips executives, pastors, and entrepreneurs to lead with clarity, purpose, and impact. His 25 plus years of experience in leadership and lean have made him a trusted advisor to global giants like IBM, Mitsubishi Electric, and Harvard University, as well as small businesses hungry for growth. But John's journey isn't just professional, it is deeply personal. After shedding 80 pounds and reclaiming his health, John applied the same grit and intentionality to help others grow themselves and grow others. His story was featured in menshealth.com, and he joins us today. Welcome, John.
Oh, it's so great to be here, Brian. Thanks for the opportunity. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Love it. So, with a big transformation, was there a specific moment or health scare that made you say enough, like something has to change?
There certainly was, and it was a journey, and we can talk about that as we go through this conversation. But I remember it vividly. I was back in 2016, and I'm sitting on my screened-in porch getting ready to go to a concert with my family. And I start to feel kind of fluttery kind of thing, and the infamous just different feelings inside of my chest. And I had always grown up with a little bit of kind of borderline high blood pressure to go forward. But I pulled my wife outside. I said, look, I don't like to be an alarmist, but I feel weird. I mean, it's just one of those things. I feel weird, and I think we ought to check my blood pressure and see what's going on. And sure enough, it was 180 over about 120 as I sat there. So she said it was time. We should go over we canceled our plans to go see the concert. While the kids were disappointed, they certainly understood. Urgent care is the first visit. High blood pressure is still there. The blood pressure is still up. And they said, we're going to get an ambulance to take you to the emergency room. I said, no, that ain't happening. I said, my wife's here. She'll take me. I promise I'll go, things like that. I'll go to the emergency room and get checked out. And I did. And eventually, as I sat there, the blood pressure came back down, but it really didn't give me any diagnosis as to what had caused it. But it was that point in time, really, I said to my wife, I said, something definitely has to change. And it is in my teaching where I would talk about people change when the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of the change itself. I knew I had to do something different. And that was kind of that point in time where at least I made the decision. I don't know that it was until January 17th, 2017, when I actually walked into the gym looking for a trainer and telling her I needed help, that was the day probably that saved my life, ultimately, physically. The trainer that I walked into, I drove by that place for years. The trainer that I walked into and saw, she said, told her my story, and she said, you got to understand, about 6 years ago, I lost my dad to a heart attack at a young age 45. I was 47 at the time. And she said, this is why I've chosen to do this. So, I don't believe in accidents. I do believe that, God has written our story and brings people into our life when we need them. And that truly was the start of that transformation in 2017.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. I call that a mirror moment. We're not always looking in the mirror, but for a lot of us, we're walked by the mirror and we glance and we see somebody who we don't recognize. Or we see someone took a picture of us and we look at the picture and you're like, well, who is that? And you realize it's me. Right. Yeah. So that moment, but it's not always, looking in the mirror specifically, but that's kind of what I call that, when there's that time. I also want to point out that there are lots of guys, men in particular, but men in particular who, you started with, I don't want to be an alarmist. But I might be dying.
Yeah, I think I might be dying. Exactly right.
I mean, you're like, man, I don't want to bother people's plans over here. And so I want to encourage men in particular. I want to encourage everyone, but men in particular, that when there's a health issue and you that voice in your head that's saying, this ain't good, like, speak up, please, for the love, speak up.
I hear you. No doubt about it. I never want to be a bother to someone, but that's, as I think about that now, as you say that, is exactly probably what it sounded like to my wife. because it's, hey, everything's okay, but I might be having a heart attack. And like, what?
That's right. That's right. So you talk about excellence only happens on purpose. You kind of alluded to that in the story you just told. How did your personal transformation reinforce that idea?
Yeah. So again, as I said, kind of that journey, like I've been through many times in my life, up and down, weight loss, weight gain.
Okay. Yep.
And it's something that inside of my family, I think being larger was normal. And the fact is, I had people even at that point in my life saying, hey, you're not overweight, you're not fat, you're just big bone, you're just large, and you carry your weight. I look back, as you said, on those mirror moments, those pictures now, I'm like, you guys were lying to me like crazy. I was fat and I just wasn't well at all. But this excellence only happens on purpose, really came on a little bit later in terms of a mantra. I believe, and Vince Lombardi would often talk, a quote that he says is, strive for perfection all the time. And maybe on the way to perfection, you reach excellence. Yeah. And when I talk about that excellence, I absolutely do believe that perfection, striving for that, will paralyze some people and they won't move forward. But if we know that excellence is a possibility, we might be able to reach that. And it has to happen on purpose. It has to happen with intentionality. It doesn't happen by serendipity. It doesn't happen by accident. That we've got to instill and make change in our lives, that the daily, weekly, and monthly habits that we have are going to lead us to that outcome of excellence. And if we focus on that process, that's going to be something that's going to be powerful for us, whether it's in our fitness, whether it's in our spiritual journey to help us develop our own relationship with Christ, or whether that's in finances and ultimately in our workplace as well. That seems to be where we talk about it the easiest in terms of excellence and being intentional. But it's in those other areas of life, including our relationships, that we've got to be intentional about as well, be on purpose as we go through that.
Okay, so you just mentioned stuff that opened up like a ton of questions for me. Right. I don't have time to ask all of them. Right. So we'll just dive into a little bit as we go. Okay, so let's start with what you agreed was the easiest, which is business, excellence in business. You talk about being intentional. To me, that means you mentioned intentional and taking action. To me, that I'm hearing a lot of structure. Can you give me a brief example of structure that is filled with intentional actions toward excellence in business?
Sure, absolutely. Well, specifically on the business side, let's go into, and again, I think it relates to all the areas of our life. The good part about being a process
I'm going to ask
guy,
about the other areas in a minute.
Being an engineer is that they as long as you can keep it simple, and I teach a 7-step methodology, but let's use one that's specific for business. And it's that second step I call the dashboard. We got to create a dashboard. And ultimately, we got to be able to set goals that matter. What's the target? Where do we want to end up? And where are we today? Once we understand what that gap is, then I believe we can design and ultimately develop the disciplines needed to close that gap. But if we don't have the target out there or where we want to end up, whether in the business side, it's profitability, productivity, revenue, whatever those numbers are, we don't know where we're going and how do we set up the right disciplines. So what you measure, you can manage. What you don't measure, you just accept. Okay.
So can you give me a specific example on the business side?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, again, I think about that, and I divide these out into outcome metrics and driver metrics as well, or outcomes and habits, whatever those are. But a specific outcome that an organization might be looking for is 10% growth in revenue. So they may want to go from $100,000 in revenue to $110,000 over the year. I would encourage them to divide that out into 12 monthly goals that they're tracking on a regular basis. And then ultimately creating this dashboard that I call it 5 in 5. From 5 feet in 5 seconds, I should be able to determine the status of that activity. So if the goal was $10,000 that month, they hit $8,000, there's a red dot over that 8,000 that says we didn't achieve the target. Red doesn't necessarily mean bad. It just indicates to us that we haven't hit the target that we were shooting for. If it's a $10,000 goal and they hit $10,000, then it's a green dot. And when you track that over the series of multiple outcome metrics, multiple drivers, take a step back and look at that from a distance, I can tell whether or not I'm winning or losing. Just like teams do out on the football field. The scoreboard is going to tell them what the score is. It also tells them what the down and distance is, the different things they've got to do to be able to win.
Okay. So you talk about an outcome goal and like increasing revenue 10%. And then you talk about these habit goals, these action goals. Those are those the specific actions that we anticipate if we take them, they will increase revenue?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a hypothesis, right? It's a true if-then statement. If I make 10 phone calls a day, then my likelihood of success to achieve my sales goal is much better. So that driver metric, that habit is make 10 calls a day to make that happen.
Okay. And that's also on the dashboard.
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So do we take that same structure and apply it to fitness?
Absolutely. That's actually how I teach it to businesses, is to apply it to fitness. I mean, that's the way that I really teach it, because ultimately, look, there's a few things that go on here. First is from the fitness world, and where many people start even in the business world, is I want to lose weight. I want to lose some weight. Yep. And the first thing I'll start off with is some is not a number and soon is not a time, and more is a city in Oklahoma. So I need you to be a little bit more specific with regards to that measurable, assuming that goal, and make it measurable. So let's put something out there that says, I want to lose 10 pounds. And oh, by the way, I encourage them to add a time to that. I want to lose 10 pounds by December 31st of this year. So it becomes specific, measurable, then it becomes action oriented. It might be realistic or not, although I encourage them to stretch inside that goal, and we can talk about that as well, but it's time based. And then now, again, what are those things you must do to lose 10 pounds? Because it doesn't happen by osmosis that you lose weight.
Yeah.
And so it may be a situation that says, how many times per week are you getting to the gym and exercising for 30 minutes? So one of your metrics might be 3 times a week I get to the gym. And did I get there 3 times last week or not? Because as a coach, I can start to ask you, okay, what's getting in your way? And we can go down that path as well. But it's understanding that there are disciplines. I can track my calories that I'm eating on a daily basis to help me understand if I can lose 10 pounds, or exercise, or steps, or in the case of what I use with my accountability group, it's calories burnt during exercise. So we share with each other how many calories, whether that's accurate or not, inside of our watches. We're just sharing with them how many calories it shows that we burnt with our exercise, because there's an accountability to that. And it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500 calories. That if we drop in a 150 number to them, it means we were active, but we probably didn't put the effort out that we needed to be successful.
Okay. Awesome. And by the way, we were talking about my book earlier before we got on the call, that my book is divided up into 12 different chapters, and it gives like specific, you were talking about, getting up and moving. And so it's how to get up and move. It is, cutting calories. Here is how we reduce calories. No secret, eat more fruits and vegetables, by the way.
Salad.
How many,
as you said,
salad,
we said before, the answer is always salad.
The answer is always salad. I can tell you that. The answer is always salad. So you mentioned when we first started this conversation about spirituality and improving our walk with Christ, for example. Do you have a similar dashboard for that as well? Because I can imagine that is probably, at least from an outcome standpoint, much more difficult to measure. But certainly there are actions that we could put with that.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, some of these qualitative metrics, if you will, they feel a little softer, almost like squeezing jello. Sure. How am I improving my faith? So, for me, what I've done actually as the outcome metric have been more about the habits, being in the Word daily. And so I have actually, again, another one is attend the men's group when I'm in town. So I have specific activities that go on inside my spiritual journey, and the when is very important to me on that as well. It's the first thing that I'm doing each day from a spiritual growth standpoint, is diving into the Word. So we have a Bible in a year plan that we're using to go through the entire Bible. And this is actually the 5th year we've done that as an accountability group, and it helps us to get through it. And it certainly, recognizes where I'm able to now, whether it's, again, quoting scripture, but certainly situationally being able to reference scripture with clients, with friends, about when they're dealing with situations. One of the very specific ones this morning was on anxiety that came out of our men's group, something that was really close, and being able to remember, say, hey, Joshua 1:9 says, don't fear, that I'm with you. God is with you all the time. And so there's certainly references for scripture that allow me to be a better brother to others, a better husband, and a better father in my life. But those disciplines are very important. If we want to grow in our spiritual life, then we have to be in the Word on a daily basis. That's just how it's going to work.
Yeah, with the advent of everyone giving their opinions on social media, and they claim it's some perspective or another. One of my challenges is, did you make that opinion? When was the last time you read scripture? Right. Because if you're reading scripture every day and that's your cool, like that's for a different perspective for me. Right. But if the last time you read the Bible was 6 months ago when you went to church, maybe we're not as close to what scripture says as you would like for it to be. Right. For me, from an outcome perspective, one of the things that I have measured, like, where is my spiritual growth? It is, do I catch myself loving someone who I wouldn't have loved before? From that Good Samaritan perspective, right?
Absolutely. And again, if we dive into the spiritual awareness.
Go dive into that parable of the Good Samaritan. And when you dive in, you're like, wow, like there's no way that should have happened, right? I mean, Jesus is making a very strong point here that I do not see a lot of in this society. And so for me, it's like, was there even a hint of me loving someone? Was that even like an awareness of, as opposed to get away from me, I shouldn't, anyway.
We know what the ultimate outcome is in that space as Christians, is that we hear one day, well done, good and faithful servant. Please join me in my kingdom. I mean, that's the outcome that we shoot for. And we know, again, as Christians, that it's not good deeds or good works that get us there. It's our faith and our belief in what's in our heart. But we will be called accountable to the things that we did, the deeds that we did or did not do. So you might as well measure and get used to being in the Word and serving others and tithing and things like that, because you're going to be asked about it. So
awesome. Thinking about like your daily, how you live your daily life. Are there minimum expectations you have for yourself, especially, and I'm thinking in terms of either fitness or food? What is the, your I know, you're traveling a lot or your busy life, what is the minimum standard that you have for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question, because, I think about, actually, when you had teed me up with that question, I didn't want it to necessarily be easy in terms of answering that. A daily discipline for me is going to be more on the nutrition side than on the exercise side. And I remember I could talk about, again, situation where my trainer said, I had gone through the journey and I had worked really hard at the start of this fitness journey back in 2017. We started in January and I got to August and I plateaued. And I lost 25 pounds. I said, hey, I'm still working hard, but the last 60 days, the scale hasn't moved at all. And I remember she asked me, she said, so let's sit down. That sounds like you're getting ready to be serious and go to the next level. She said, what do you eat? And I started walking her through what I'd been eating the last week. That's what happened. She actually had a belly laugh when I started to tell her what I was eating. And she says, look, we're going to start on this nutrition side and really understand it. But the saying was, you cannot out-exercise a bad diet.
Correct.
And again, regardless, inside of your business, inside of your nutrition or your fitness goals, you cannot out-exercise a bad diet. So for me, it really starts on a daily basis with how I'm fueling my body. And these are things that I've even learned over the past couple of years, because I'm still looking continuously improve on what that means. So it's starting off the morning with 16 ounces of cold water and electrolyte mixed in. That's the very first thing I do in the morning. I don't even have to hit the coffee button start anymore, because I do that the night before. But I've got those supplements that I take as well that sometimes you don't see all the time. They're the fish oil that I take in the morning and the vitamin D that I need to make that happen. All those different things from a vitamin standpoint to get me going. But again, I think especially on the fitness side, on the exercise, it's become finding people to hang around who are also in that space. And for me, I got 4 other guys in accountability group that aren't even here in the same town, but we check in with each other on a daily basis and say, how did we do? How did we start our day? Did we read and spend time in scripture? Did we drink our coffee? We really talk about that. And did we exercise? What's your hashtag that lets you know that we got our exercise done? And when we see that, someone isn't recording their hashtags of how many calories over 2 or 3 days, it pushes us to check in and say, hey, what's going on with you? You're not hitting you're not telling us what your exercise target is. Are you getting there? So that accountability with others on this journey is very important as well.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Do you have strategies for when life just gets hard? You're stressed, or you're traveling, or and so a lot of people listening to this, for example, are going to be a little younger than we are, so they have young kids.
Mm-hmm.
And,
right.
And a couple in particular, I'm like, look, life is about surviving sometimes and thriving other times. You're in survival mode, right? Coming to the gym, just show up. Right. We don't need to hit PRs or personal records, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't need nutrition to be perfect, right? This is, it's hard to do everything at once. But I was wondering if you had any strategies for when life gets hard.
It's so funny you say this. I mean, there's, it's very important in life, fitness, and again, relating it back to business, which I often do in my executive coaching or consulting, is that we've got this purpose. Back to the excellence only happens on purpose. We've got a vision for what we're trying to create. And I'm not just talking about a dashboard anymore. I often refer, this is the first step. It's a decision that we make on the front end. I call it the so that. Ultimately, it's a 3-step framework. So what, now what, so that. The so what is I may define it as an opportunity. I need to lose weight, or I need to become more fit. I need my business to run better. Now what? That's the so that. I mean, that's the opportunity, or the so what? That's the opportunity. Now what is, I must change. I need to make the decision that I need to improve, that I need to exercise more, that whatever that is in terms of that decision. But ultimately, it's that so that statement at the end. It's the why that exists. And specifically for your listeners that, again, if we're a heavy focus on fitness and what that means, it's understanding why we want to lose 10 pounds. It's not because we want to look at the scale and have a good number or be way less than we did in high school. While those things might be important, they're not the real purpose in which we do things. And I had this picture, and it's something that's on my desk all the time, that popped up on a quote that I saw recently. It says, I'm exercising so that I can take my son on a trip for his 50th birthday. I'm exercising so that I can dance at my grandkids' weddings. I'm exercising so that they all can look after themselves in 30 years because I can still look after me. This isn't just for me, it's for everyone I care about. So it's understanding the why in terms of what you do. That's understanding that so that, lets others know that you care about them as well, and that there's something more important than just losing 10 pounds on a scale. It's that so that.
Awesome. That's amazing. Can you send that to me?
Sure, absolutely. I'll send you a picture of it and send it over to you. I cut off the one, don't get me wrong. The picture, as you all see it, it's like a woman that's doing exercise, and she said, the first thing it said was, I'm not exercising so I can fit in a bikini. I'm definitely not doing that either. You. I cut that part off of the picture and cropped it out, but the other stuff was like, hit a home run with me. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you can send this to me, I'll post it on my socials and put a link in the description of this podcast, so that people could see it as well. If you could go back in time 10 years, what would you tell yourself? What would you guide yourself? What would you want to do differently 10 years ago? I love
this question because it's something that I'm always working on. But that specific, whether it's advice or whether it's wisdom, is don't settle. I talked about my journey starting in 2017. Back in 2015, I've been fighting pain for about a year in my neck and down my arm, and just didn't understand what it was. And I had really settled myself there, mid 40s, and said, I guess I'm just going to have to face this the rest of my life and just deal with it. And I remember there was a physician I was consulting in healthcare up in front of the room. He pulled me aside one of the breaks. He says, "You look like you're in pain." I said, "Dude, I am in pain." Or I said, "Doctor, dude, I am in pain all the time. It's just something that's chronic for me that I've learned to accept." He says, "I don't think you have to do that. Let's get you set up with a doctor." We did an x-ray, found ultimately that I had a bulging disc in my neck that was pushing on my spinal cord. It was causing all kind of problems. I had neck fusion to fix that. And I knew when I woke up from that surgery, like the pain was gone. I had not felt pain in a year. I'm like, whoa, this feels different. And I realized, now don't get me wrong, that didn't fix me to say even, but what I had said was, now I have this neck issue. Okay. And like, I just have to settle that I have a impingement all the time. It's going to keep me from doing things, ate as much as I wanted to, didn't exercise. I'm just going to live life hard. And that was another thing that I had settled for, that I thought that I just had to settle that it's going to be like that.
Yeah.
And we don't have to settle.
Yeah.
Okay. We can improve on a daily basis and move toward that excellence that we're talking about. So, don't settle. And again, this happens in business all the time. Things are going okay. We don't have to really change. No. We weren't called to be mediocre. We weren't called to settle. We were called to be uncommon. We were called to be different. And our purpose, if we define it properly, is much bigger than that. So let's keep growing.
Yeah, man, that's awesome. Thank you, John. As we start to wrap up, I always like to ask, but I already know what I want the answer to be. If you could give our listeners one specific action to move forward that they could take away from this conversation right now, what would you guide them with?
Yeah, let me use a hashtag that I've used before in terms of starting small. Hashtag was stop eating French fries. Okay. When I had that conversation with my trainer, when she belly laughed at me and she started talking about nutrition, she said, I'm not going to put you on some diet where you restrict yourself and only eat 1,200 calories a day. Let's just start pulling one thing out of your regular nutrition that's not good for you and try something else. She said, you eat French fries 5 days a week. Let's just take that down to 1 day a week kind of thing. Like that would be a breakthrough.
Not get rid of it. Just 1 day a week.
Just 1 day a week instead of 5,
trainer.
and replace the other 4 days with that salad that you talked about that, I've come to really love, or those vegetables that are green that sit on your plate rather than those fried white ones that sit on your plate that you rationalize were vegetables. And so in life, whatever it is that we're working on, that we're trying to get better, if it's our business, if it's our faith, if it's our fitness journey, finances, whatever it is, start small. Just stop eating French fries once in a while. What are those French fries in your work disciplines that are causing you? What are those French fries in your spiritual journey that are causing you to do things you don't want to do? And just start with something small. You don't have to start with reading the Bible in a year. Okay. Just start with reading the verse of the day on the Bible app.
Yeah.
Okay. And spend 45 seconds in it and see what that really is. You're like, oh, wow, that kind of makes sense. I want more. Because at that time, you'll start to see the improvement, and it'll drive you to say, no, I want more. I want to be better.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Thank you, John. How can listeners best reach out to you if they are interested in learning more, whether about, for entrepreneur coaching, or what's the best way that they can connect with you?
Brian, love this opportunity as well. Thank you so much. The best way to reach me, and you can find all my social media there as well, is on my personal website, coachjohngallagher.com.
Okay.
And look, for your listeners as well, if they will go out onto that website, take a look at it, and drop me a note, ultimately in social media, I'll send them a template that I have for the ideal week that actually outlines and helps them identify, when do I want to do my disciplines? When do I want to do my exercise? When do I do my work? When do I do my spiritual study, to help them move forward on a regular basis to continuously improve? So they can find that there.
Awesome. That's amazing. Thank you, John. Really appreciate your time today. This is great wisdom. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Brian.
Have a great day.